Go down? No. Good evening and welcome to our weekly Torah class. This is Nitzutzos, Sparks, Tidbits, no long discussions, but short and hopefully pithy comments on the Torah. The name of this week's Torah portion is Vayechi, or Vayechi Yaakov, and Yaakov lived. We had a similar portion a few weeks ago called Chaye Sarah, the life of Sarah, and what was it about? Her passing, her burial, and the aftermath of that. Here too, most of this Parsha is about the events that led to his passing or preceded his passing, and the events that followed his passing, his burial, and so on and so forth. Yet it's called Vayechi Yaakov, and Yaakov lives. So there are several explanations of that, but the most obvious explanation is that when you talk about a righteous person, when do you really see that their life is true life after their passing? Because everyone who has a body that is animated by a soul we consider to be alive. But the Talmud says that a wicked person, even when he's alive, he's really dead, because his life has no meaning, has no purpose, has no spiritual and godly vitality. Conversely, a tzaddik, a righteous person, even when he's dead, he's alive. And actually this has a halachic implication. It says in the Torah, you're not allowed to go to the dead to ask things of the dead. That's one of the pagan rituals. So the Zohar asks, then why is it that we find, and we not only allow it, but we encourage people to go to the grave sites of tzaddikim, of righteous people, and pray there? So the Zohar says, because they're alive. They are more alive in their state of death than people who are not righteous are alive when they are physically breathing and their heart is beating. So Yaakov, in his passing, that's what you see, that the person has a true life, because the true life of a tzaddik is a spiritual life, a godly life. That's true about every tzaddik. But we find that specifically about Yaakov because the Talmud says something very radical, it would sound, that Yaakov lo mes, Jacob did not die. And one could say, well, if we talk about righteous people as living even when they're dead, then why do we single out Jacob and not apply that to Abraham, to Isaac, to all the other great people? So the commentaries explain that there was something unique about Yaakov, that he, more than any other tzaddik, was alive even after it appeared that he had died. And there are some commentators who actually say that Yaakov never physically died. So then why did they bury him? So Rashi, in his commentary on the Talmud, says, Nidma lahem shemes. It appeared to them that he died, but he was really physically alive, although they couldn't tell that he was alive, but he was alive. Now, why is it so important to emphasize that Jacob is alive? So there are 2 points. Number one, Jacob personified the trait of emes, truth. Truth means something that never changes. It never weakens. It never degenerates. The word emes, the Jerusalem Talmud says, is a composite of 3 letters. An aleph, a mem, and a tuf. Those are the 3 important letters of the alphabet, because the aleph is the first letter, the mem is a middle letter, and the tuf is the final letter. What does that tell you about truth? That it's consistent from the beginning through the middle to the end. Consistency means that it's never terminated. It never really weakens. That's why Jacob, who personifies emes, never really dies. His presence is always here. Jacob also personifies the Jewish people as a people. What is unique about the Jewish people is that they are an immortal people. The Jewish people cannot ever be destroyed. Just like God promised that he will not destroy the world can never be destroyed. The Jewish people can never be destroyed. Other nations can come and go. The Jewish people will be here forever, notwithstanding all the attempts of all the anti-Semites of history to try to get us out of existence. We are here forever. And that's all represented by Jacob, who is the father of the Jewish people in ways more than Abraham and Isaac, because all of his children followed in his footsteps. Jacob therefore personifies the collective nature of the Jewish people, which live forever. That's why the Torah portion is called Vayechi Yaakov, and Yaakov lived because he, more than any other righteous person, is always alive. His presence has never waned. So the Torah begins in this portion to say that Yaakov lived in the land of Egypt 17 years. And the commentators point out that these were the best 17 years of his life. Why were these the best 17 years of his life? Because these were the 17 years with which he spent with his son, his favorite son, Joseph. Actually, how many years did he really spend with Joseph? 17 years in the beginning of Joseph's life. That's when he was sold into slavery. And 17 years at the end of Jacob's life, for a total of 34. The word Vayechi, and he lived, has a numerical value. A Vav is a 6, a Yud is a 10, a Ches is an 8, Yud is a 10. If you add that up, it's 34. Vayechi, his life was represented by the number 34 because those were the days that he was together with Joseph. Now, on the surface, it sounds like, yeah, father loves his child, his favorite child, and the fact that he was together with him, that was paradise for him. But it's more than that, more than just a physical coexistence with his son Joseph, in close proximity to his son Joseph. It's the spiritual character, because who is the one who took Jacob's ideals and spread it to the rest of the world? It was Joseph. Joseph is the extension of Jacob. So even though Joseph is not one of the three forefathers, because if he would be one of the three forefathers, it would be four forefathers, which would be more appropriate, you would think. Three forefathers, not three fathers. It's three forefathers. But Joseph was not another forefather. What he did is he channeled all of what the other forefathers represented into the rest of the world. He brought it even into Egypt. You can't get lower than Egypt. And through Joseph's influence, we are connected to Jacob, and through that to Abraham and Isaac as well. Okay, Jacob is now 147 years old, and he realizes that his time has come. And he calls in Joseph, and he makes him swear that he will not bury him in Egypt. Why didn't he want to be buried in Egypt? Instead, he wanted to be buried in the plot of his fathers and mothers in the cave of Machpelah in Hebron. But why didn't he want to be buried in Egypt? It's not just he wanted to be buried in Israel, he specifically did not want to be buried in Egypt. So Rashi gives a few explanations. Number one, he knew that the earth of Egypt will turn into lice. One of the 10 plagues, the third one, was the earth turned into lice. He didn't want to be together with those lice. Although a little strange, because if you're not together with lice, you're with the earth. Why is that any better? But the possible explanation is that if he would have been with the lice, people would have interpreted that to mean that Jacob was also being subjected to the same punishment of the Egyptians. He didn't want to be lumped together with the Egyptians in terms of their punishment. Another reason why he didn't want to be buried in Egypt, Rashi says, because when the resurrection of the dead will happen in the Messianic age, which Jacob was very much fixated on, as we'll soon see, there's a principle, the Talmud explains, that in Israel, the dead will just come up, will just sprout out of the earth without any pain, without any type of effort. However, those who are buried outside of Israel will have to go through tunnels, and that will be a painful experience. What exactly that means is a separate subject we're not going to go into right now. He didn't want to have to go through that painful experience. He wanted to be buried in Israel where he would get up right away. And the third reason was he didn't want the Egyptians to deify him. The Egyptians saw that Jacob was a holy man. It says when he came to Pharaoh, the famine that was supposed to be for 7 years ceased after 2 years and did not resume until Jacob's passing. As soon as he would go to the Nile would rise and would irrigate the whole land, and the famine would end. So when a man could do things like that, it was likely that the pagan Egyptians would think of him as a god, and they would worship him. That's why he didn't want to be buried in Egypt. Those are the three reasons. But the Rebbe adds another reason. Jacob knew that his descendants will be in slavery, will be in exile. When you're in exile, you're a prisoner of the culture in which you live, and you're influenced by it, and once you're influenced by it, there's a chance that you'll never be able to get out of it. He wanted to be the inspiration for the Jewish people that will enable them to extricate themselves from Egypt and from exile and return to Israel. He felt if he was in Egypt itself, he would be part of the problem. He would be himself a prisoner of sorts. There's a principle in the Talmud that a prisoner cannot free himself. The Talmud tells a story of a rabbi who was very ill. His colleague came, and the colleague asked him, "Do you want to suffer?" And he said, "No." He says, "Give me your hand." And he picked him up, and he was cured. Now the rabbi who did the curing miraculously became ill himself. And someone else came to visit him, and the same story repeated itself. The man who visited him said, "Do you want to suffer?" "No." "Give me your hand." And he picked him up and he healed him. So the Talmud asked the obvious question, if he had the power to heal someone else by just taking his hand, why didn't he take his own hand or whatever else it took to heal himself? And the Talmud coins the expression, Ein chavush mater atzmo mebeis v'asurim. A prisoner cannot free himself from prison.
Why do you think it was important to reveal to him that the Jews would be enslaved?
Because it was already told to Abraham. And he knew now, by this time, that...
And I mean, what was the purpose in revealing the
so that he could do
torture?
Something to prepare them for it, and to give them the strength to be able to survive it, and ultimately get out of it. If a person knows that they are, God forbid, someone gets a life sentence without any chance of parole, that's a lot more devastating than if they're given a 30-year sentence. Now you think a 30-year sentence is essentially a life sentence, but when you know there's an end to it, psychologically, it gives you a certain sense of, well, I'm not here for life.
There was no rush to leave?
It wasn't up to them to leave, but they had to have the strength to endure the exile and not be lost, and then the strength to be able to get out of exile. And that's the strength that Jacob bestowed upon them by not being part of the slavery itself. Joseph, on the other hand, was the opposite. Joseph wanted to be buried in Egypt because he wanted to be with his people. So you have two approaches, and the Rebbe says, why did Jacob ask Joseph to swear that he won't bury him in Egypt? He wouldn't take Joseph's word for it? So the simple explanation is Joseph was still not the king. Pharaoh was above him, and Pharaoh might say, one second, Jacob is a national treasure. We're not going to let Jacob leave this country. We need him here. He stopped the famine, so that's why Jacob knew that Joseph would have a hard time convincing Pharaoh, so we had to make him swear that he'll do it. That's part of an explanation given, but the Rebbe says there's a deeper explanation. Joseph's philosophy was the very opposite of Jacob's. Jacob's philosophy was you can only help people being outside, because if you're within the same community or the same situation, you're a prisoner yourself. How can you get out of it? Joseph, on the other hand, said you can only help someone when you're within the same environment, and you can empathize because you know and experience that person's pain and suffering, and you want to be with that person. There's a story of the Baal Shem Tov. There was a certain community that Baal Shem Tov was told from on high that that community has a terrible decree hovering over them, and they might be destroyed, wiped out. It was not an uncommon thing in those days for communities to be subjected to pogroms and wiped out. So the Baal Shem Tov said to his students, come, let's go to that community and pray for them. And he prayed for them, and he averted the decree. So the question was asked, he could have prayed from his hometown. Prayers don't need to be in the place of the crisis. God can hear your prayers wherever you are. And the answer is, the Baal Shem Tov's reasoning was as follows. He said, if I'm successful in averting the decree, great. If not, I want to be destroyed together with them. I want to be part of the destruction. I don't want to be saved from the destruction that will come to the people who I couldn't save with my prayers. Well, Joseph's philosophy was, I want to be part of the community. I want to be in their exile with them so I can help them. Jacob said, in order to help them, I have to be distant. Now, the interesting thing is that we need a combination of Jacob and Joseph. If you want to help someone, you can only help them if you can empathize with them. That means you have to experience their pain. But if you experience their pain and they can't help themselves, then you can't help them either. So you have to be able to feel their pain and then withdraw and be outside of their pain to help them. That's the Jacob and the Joseph dynamic. And that's why Jacob said to Joseph, I know your philosophy is to stay here, but my philosophy is to be outside, so therefore I want you to swear that you will not force me to remain in Egypt. Okay, so Joseph swears, and then Jacob now becomes ill, and Joseph brings his two sons to be blessed by his father before he passes away. And Jacob says that your two sons that were born here in Egypt, to me, are just like my own two sons of Reuven and Shimon. Your two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh. So that's why Ephraim and Manasseh are two of the 12 tribes. When we count them as part of the 12 tribes, we don't count the tribe of Levi. That's why when Israel was settled, it was divided into 12. Joseph got 2 portions, Ephraim and Manasseh. The tribe of Levi got 0 portions. They got cities, but they didn't get any real sections of Israel.
You would think he would normally bless his son.
He did bless all his sons later on, but first he blessed his grandsons. And something very strange happened. Jacob was not able to see. His eyes had become dimmed. So what Joseph does is to bring his 2 sons towards Jacob, for Jacob to put his hands on the heads of his 2 sons. Now, Manasseh was the oldest son, so he brings Manasseh to the right hand of Jacob, because the right in Judaism is the stronger hand, the more powerful, the hand of giving, the hand of bestowing. The left hand is the weaker hand, so it's the inferior blessing. So he was going to put his right hand, the way Joseph imagined, on the head of Manasseh, the oldest son, and his left hand, the weaker hand, on the head of Ephraim. So what does Jacob do? Jacob crisscrosses his hands, and he puts his right hand on the head of Ephraim and the left hand on the head of Manasseh. And Joseph says, no, Dad, that's not the right thing. Manasseh is the oldest son. And Jacob says, I know. Ephraim will be great, but Manasseh will be greater.
No, Ephraim.
I'm sorry, Manasseh will be great, right? Manasseh will be great, but Ephraim will be greater. And he blesses Ephraim before Manasseh. What exactly is going on over here? What does it mean? Ephraim will be great, Manasseh will be great, but Ephraim will be greater. So Rashi explains that who is a descendant of Ephraim? Joshua, the conqueror of Israel, Moses' greatest disciple, one of the greatest leaders that ever lived. Who is Manasseh's descendant? An inferior leader. So what does that have to do with giving a blessing? I mean, if you have 2 children, and the custom is to give your older child the first blessing, the primary blessing, why would you try to switch things around? So the answer to that requires an understanding of what a blessing is. And just very briefly, a blessing is not just good wishes for someone that you bless. Let's say you see a person and you say, you're not feeling well, I wish you a speedy recovery. It's nice. That's an expression of goodwill. You care for the person, and it makes the person feel better. So it's a great thing. It's a wonderful thing. It's Ahavas Yisrael, showing love for your fellow. But that's not the extent of a blessing. The word bracha, the Hebrew word for blessing, is related to another Hebrew word, which is to draw something from one place to another place. It's used in the context of agriculture, called havracha. When you take a plant that's coming out of the ground over here, and you extend it downward into the earth and bury it there, so you'll have two trees growing now. So what's the idea is you're taking life and energy and nutrition from one place and you're extending it and bringing it into another location. That's what a blessing is. We all have a lot of energy and positive energy that is allocated for us. But it's allocated in a place that may not become accessible to us. Because in getting God's blessings, there are two steps. There's one step for God to allocate the blessing, then it has to go through the pipeline to get to us. And sometimes it gets stuck in middle. Something, maybe it's because of our behavior, maybe it's because of something that we don't even understand, that the good energy that is supposed to come to us gets stuck in the pipeline, or it never even enters the pipeline. It's still there in the reservoir. Interestingly, the word bracha is also related to another Hebrew word, brecha, which means a pool, a reservoir. So the bracha is to take the energy from the reservoir and channel it down to us, that we can get the benefit from it. So when Jacob was giving his sons a blessing, he was looking at their potential. We can't do that. But Jacob was able to see the potential of Ephraim and Manasseh, and he saw that Ephraim has a much greater potential than Manasseh. And therefore he was trying to give him the greater blessing because he had more energy that had to be channeled down into this world. On another level, Ephraim and Manasseh are both sons of Joseph, but they're also symbols of two different approaches to serving God. Manasseh comes from the word to forget. Joseph called his older son Manasseh because he said, God made me forget all my travail that I had in my father's house. Ephraim is about being fruitful. Ephraim comes from the word Ephrani. Actually, in English, the word fruit comes from the Hebrew word to be fruitful. Pru is be fruitful. Ephrani, Ephraim, is all related to the word fruit, fruitful, grow. It's all positive. Because in serving God, we have two different roads. There's one road where we run away from evil. Sur meira, in the words of the psalmist. We go away from evil. We struggle with evil and we run away from it. Then there's asay tov, doing good. Which is superior an approach in serving God? The person who's fighting evil, not succumbing to evil, or the person who's constantly doing good? Well, Jacob decided Ephraim, the one who represents doing good, takes precedence over Manasseh, who's about fighting evil. Sure, you have to fight evil. Sure, evil is an obstacle to doing good even. But which is the primary focus of our service to God? It's the act of doing good. It's the same dispute between the school of Hillel and the school of Shammai. How you light Hanukkah candles. We just came from Hanukkah. The school of Hillel says you light one, then you light two, then you light three. You keep on adding. That's Joseph. Joseph is increasing, adding. That's Ephraim. You're bringing more and more light into the world. The school of Shammai says, well, we have to get rid of the darkness. We have to get rid of the evil. So each night, first night we're fighting against the real formidable evil. So we have to shoot with all our guns, all our whatever the word is, to get rid of the formidable evil. Second night, the evil is weaker. We don't need as much firepower. The third night, we can use even less. The last night, we have very little evil left. So the school of Shammai focuses on getting rid of the evil. The school of Hillel, which we follow, is focused on doing good, bringing more and more light into the world. That's the Ephraim versus the Manasseh. Okay, now Jacob summons all his children. And he says, I'm going to tell you what will happen to you in the end of days. In the end of days. It means, as Rashi says, he wanted to reveal to them when redemption will happen, the final redemption. And all of a sudden, the Shekhinah, the divine presence, departed from him. What was going on? Why did he want to reveal to them? And why did the divine presence go away? Well, the reason why the divine presence went away from him is because if he had told them the truth, when the redemption would happen, they would realize that it was thousands of years away. That would have demoralized them. And therefore, the thought of not being able to see the redemption and causing them the sadness, God did not want that to happen. So he started to talk about other things. But if you read between the lines, virtually everything he's saying relates to the future redemption. So here he has 12 sons in front of him. He's on his deathbed. You would expect a father who's giving his sons blessings would give him only nice blessings and would not criticize them. Yet the first 3 sons did not get one blessing. They're criticized. Reuven is criticized for his impulsiveness. Shimon and Levi are criticized for their anger. What kind of a father is that? Already on his deathbed, if he was upset at them, he should have told them before this, which he probably did. So why is he repeating it? Why is he repeating these critical statements? You're impulsive, and that's why you lost the privilege of being the firstborn. You are filled with anger, and that's why I'm going to scatter you amongst all of Israel. He's criticizing them and threatening them with punishment. What kind of a blessing is this? So Rashi says at the end, he consolidated all of the tribes into one big blessing for everyone. But yet, all the other tribes he gave specific blessings for, except for these 3. So one way of explaining it is, when a person is a blessed person, has all the positive qualities. In fact, they have more qualities than most other people. But they have a problem. Their problem obscures their real qualities. So what do you do if you want them to be blessed? You don't have to give them a blessing for them to be positive. You have to remove the impediment to their potential. Reuven, Shimon, and Levi actually had superior qualities to the other tribes. Because why was Reuven impulsive? Reuven was very concerned. What happened? His father, after the death of Rachel, moved his bed into the tent of Bilhah, Rachel's handmaiden, rather than to the tent of Leah. And Reuven was very upset about that, and to honor his mother, to protect the honor of his mother, he switched the bed back into Leah's tent. And for that he was punished, and for that he had to atone. And he did it impulsively. So what Jacob was saying to Reuven, you're a great guy, but you used your zeal for the wrong thing. This was not where you should have used your impulsiveness. Is being impulsive a good thing? The answer is yes, and the answer is no. That's what being Jewish is. You could say yes and no to the same question. There is a principle in the Talmud, zrizin, makdimin lemitzvahs. People who are conscientious do a mitzvah as soon as they can do it. They don't postpone it. They do it at the first opportunity with alacrity, with dispatch, without any procrastination. That's a quality. That's a positive quality. But it's also a negative trait if you don't channel it the right way. So by criticizing Reuven, he was removing the negative aspect of his impulsiveness so that Reuven remains with the positive. Same thing with Shimon and Levi. What does he say to them? He says, "Cursed shall be their anger." He wasn't cursing them, he was cursing their anger. What did they do wrong? So he criticizes them. He says, with their anger they killed a man, and by their own desire they uprooted an ox. Jacob is being poetic over here. Who is the man? The man is the residents of the city of Shechem, especially the mayor of Shechem, Hamor, and his son Shechem. By the way, Shechem is now in the so-called West Bank, where they renamed it Nablus. But that's where Joseph is buried, and that was the city that Jacob purchased. So it's unquestionably Jewish land occupied by the Arabs. At any rate, they wiped out the whole city like one man. And the ox is a metaphor for Joseph. Who were the ones who sold Joseph? Who were the ones who wanted to kill him? Shimon and Levi. They conspired to do it. So he's criticizing them for killing the city of Shechem and trying to destroy Joseph. So one of the commentaries explains that what they did was not done because they were bad people or they were doing the wrong thing. They reasoned that they were doing the right thing. They felt that Shechem deserved to be wiped out because of what they did to their sister Dinah. They believed that Joseph deserved to be killed because of what he did, and we're not going to go into what they charged him with or what they accused him of. So what was wrong? Why should they be criticized if they felt what they did was justified? So one of the commentaries explains that when you have to punish someone, your job is to use judgment against someone who does something wrong. You're a teacher and you have to punish your students. You're a parent, you have to punish your kids. You're a government official and you have to punish a criminal. The only justification for you being involved in punishment is that, number one, it's not done with anger, and number two, it's not done willingly. You do it because you have to do it. In other words, if you have to punish, the simplest example is a parent punishing a child. The parent should not punish the child in a state of anger. He should punish the child because that's his responsibility as a father, to help the child. And as the famous cliche, it hurts me more than it hurts you. But that's the way it should be. That number one, you're not angry, and number two, you don't want to do it. You're forced into doing it. But when they killed the city of Shechem, they did it with anger. Bi'apam hargu ish. They did it with anger. And when they tried to sell or kill Joseph, birtzonam, willingly, they didn't do it. Oh, we have no choice. We have to do. We don't really want to do it, but we have to do it. No, they did it willingly. That's what he was criticizing. And once he got rid of the negative, they were already blessed. In fact, they were superior to the other tribes in that regard. Then we go to the most important blessing, to Yehuda. Yehuda says to disappear when he heard how his three older brothers were being criticized. Like, now I'm next. And he knew what he had. He could have been criticized for the story. He sold Joseph and with Tamar. But he said, no, you're different. You're different. Yehuda was not criticized by his father. In fact, Yehuda is blessed that he will be ultimately the ancestor of Mashiach. It doesn't use the word Mashiach. It says a scepter will never depart from Yehuda, and a lawgiver will never depart from his children. Ad ki yavo Shiloh, until Shiloh comes. There's a book that was written, a 600-page book, to define what Shiloh means here. There's so many different interpretations what Shiloh means.
Isn't Shiloh a place also?
Shiloh is a place. Shiloh is also a name, one of the names that are given to Mashiach. So the traditional interpretation, the one that Rashi gives, is that Yehuda will be the leader, the ancestor, the progenitor of leaders up until and including Mashiach. Who is Mashiach? Shiloh. Why is Mashiach called Shiloh? Because Shiloh is a composite of two words. Shai-lo. The gift is his. And it refers to a medrash that the gifts, Mashiach will receive gifts from the nations of the world. When Mashiach comes, they'll all bring him gifts. Now, why is that such an important thing about Mashiach, that people will bring him gifts? What's the gift they're going to bring him? The Maharal, one of the great commentators and Jewish philosophers and leaders, says that what it really means here is not physically they're going to bring him gifts. What are they going to bring him, a new iPhone, or he's going to have to make a decision, do I want an iPhone or an Android? Mashiach doesn't have to deal with such issues. What kind of gift are they going to bring him? So the Maral explains that Mashiach is going to be very different from any other leader. All leaders lead with power. They have power. They have the police force, the army at their disposal. They have the ability to control people with power. Mashiach, people will be drawn to him because he won't have to use power. He will get the people to want to follow him. How will he do that? Because Mashiach has the power to break through the barriers of our personalities. A true king has the power, literally, to break through barriers. If a king is traveling from city to city, and the shortcut would be, he would have a shortcut if he broke through a fence and go through someone's property, he can do that. That's a statement in the Talmud. Mashiach, Melech rather, a king, Poretz Geder, could break through boundaries. One of the titles that Mashiach has is he's called Peretz. Peretz means breaking through boundaries. Paratzta, you shall break through and spread forth. Mashiach is the ultimate person who can break through boundaries. What are boundaries? It can be physical boundaries, but there are also spiritual boundaries or barriers. We have barriers on our personality. Sometimes we can't express our true feelings. Why? Because there's a cover. Men generally have more of a cover than women. Women are much more expressive of their emotions. Men have that barrier. But what a king does, and Mashiach is the ultimate king, he will remove the barriers and allow us to express our innate goodness. That's how he's going to change people. He's not going to need an army to enforce the rule that the Arabs in the Middle East are going to stop hating Jews and stop Jews from building their temple. He's going to reveal the good in them. They're going to want the Jews to stay in Israel and build the temple. They're going to want to have peace with the Jewish people. And likewise, all of us will discover hidden positive qualities that we have, because the barriers that don't allow us to express who we really are will be removed. That's the gift that the nations will bring to Mashiach. The gift is they'll discover their true identities. They'll discover the true inner goodness. Now, there are some people who are so evil that there's no hope for them. But the majority of people do have hope if the barriers would be removed.
Is that Perez like Shimon Perez?
No, that's Perez. This is Peretz.
Shimon Peretz, I think it was Peretz.
There's another, no, his name was Perez with a Samach. There is another, I think he was a mayor of Haifa whose last name was Peretz.
Perez.
Yeah, that's
What are the two words that Shiloh means? Shiloh.
Shai, a gift, lo is to him.
A gift to him.
Right, gift to him. Well, Rashi says the leadership is his. The words Shiloh has the numerical value of Moses, Moshe. Yavo Shiloh, how will Mashiach come? Yavo Shiloh adds up to Mashiach, and Shiloh itself adds up to Moshe. Mashiach's power is Moshe. What does that mean? Moshe can't be the Mashiach because Mashiach has to be a descendant of King David. Moshe lived before King David. It has to be from the tribe of Yehuda. Moshe was from the tribe of Levi. But it means that what did Moshe personify? Torah. The power that Mashiach has is his fidelity to Torah, his dissemination of Torah. That's the power that will bring redemption.
Question, Rabbi. How does it reconcile the difficulty that the scepter shall not depart from Yehuda? Does it mean there will always be kings from Yehuda? And if so, there was a time when the dynasty finished.
Right, that was one of the questions that was asked of the Rashba, one of the early commentators, in debates that he had with the Christians, because there was a time when the leaders were not around from the tribe of Yehuda. So he interpreted that the verse means that the power of Yehuda will not leave because it'll be reinstated when Mashiach comes. Now, there's another interpretation of the word Shiloh, that it means the city of Shiloh. What did it mean? The city of Shiloh will come? Who in Jewish history is identified with the city of Shiloh? Does anyone know?
Was the tabernacle, no?
Yeah, but who? Which person is identified with Shiloh? His name has the word Shiloh in it. There's a prophet who was the teacher of Elijah. His name is Achia Hashiloni. Achia, the man from Shiloh. What is he famous for? He predicted and also was instrumental in dividing Israel into two states. He created the schism, but as a prophet. He didn't do it on his own. It's not that he wanted to do it, but he was told that that's what was going to happen. That was the beginning of the generation of the state of existence in Israel, to the point where the Jewish people were split into two kingdoms. One kingdom deteriorated quickly, rather quickly. The other one lasted a little bit longer until it finally came to an end with the destruction of the temple. So Achia, that's what it means, that Yehuda will be in charge until Achia will come and he will take away the power from Yehuda. Now, what I find fascinating about Achia was a very fascinating person, because the Rambam writes, and it's based on Talmudic sources, that Achia had longevity. He was around in the days of Moses. He was one of the Jews who left Egypt. And he lived hundreds of years until after King David and after King Solomon. And according to one midrash, he never died. He went alive into paradise. According to Hasidic tradition that the Baal Shem Tov himself revealed, this Achia returned to this world and became Baal Shem Tov's teacher for 10 years, until the Baal Shem Tov became a public figure and a leader. And it seems that Achia, he started the problem with exile. He caused the split, which ultimately led to the destruction of the temple. And Achia is the one who brought into this world the Baal Shem Tov, brought him to his stature, who was the one who taught the teachings of Chassidus, about which Mashiach said that he will come when those teachings will be disseminated. So where did the Baal Shem Tov get his teachings from? Achia, Shiloh. So Shiloh is associated with Achia, but it's also associated with Mashiach. The two are connected. There's a translation of the Torah by the father of the Haskalah, the Enlightenment movement. His name was Moses Mendelssohn. He was generally reviled by the leading Jewish personalities because his influence brought about the secularization of Judaism, which ultimately led to most Jews departing from traditional Judaism. And he wrote a translation, or he endorsed the translation of the Torah. It's called Biur, just commentary, translation and commentary. And if you read it, there's nothing wrong with it on the surface. You have to read between the lines to see where he's showing his heresy. What does he do? When it comes to the word Shiloh over here, there are two interpretations. One interpretation, the one I mentioned before, that Rashi gives, that it's referring to Mashiach. However, the Ibn Ezra, another great medieval commentator, says that it doesn't mean Mashiach, it refers to Achia, the prophet that came from Shiloh. So he has a right to follow Ibn Ezra. Ibn Ezra was one of the greatest medieval commentators.
He quoted Ibn Ezra.
Yeah. Well,
Mendelssohn quoted Ibn Ezra.
I don't know if he quotes him by name, but he uses his commentary. Then, in the book of Numbers, where it talks about the prophecies of Bilam, it says, Darach Kochav Meyakov, a star will come forth from Jacob. There, Ibn Ezra says it refers to Mashiach. Rashi says it refers to King David. So what does Mendelssohn's translation say? It refers to King David. He follows Rashi. So you see that he has a pattern, that he's not consistent. He'll follow the opinion that dismisses that doesn't interpret it to refer to Mashiach. What does that tell you? That the Haskalah movement, its first victim was the belief in Mashiach. That was the first attack against Judaism, and the secularization of Judaism was against the idea of Mashiach. And tell you a little joke. The Dubna Magid was a famous rabbi. I think his yahrzeit will be in a few days, the day that the Paris conference is supposed to take place. He was famous for his parables, and he would talk about Mashiach, and the people who were influenced by this secular movement would mock him and his belief in Mashiach. So once he decided to get even with them. So he tells them a story, a parable. What's the parable? A fox is hungry, and he sees a bird perched on a branch. So he sees dinner. So he says to the bird, "Bird, you're my good friend. Come down and join me. We're good friends. We'll get along." And the bird says, "Don't think I'm so stupid. I know what you want. I'm not going down." And the fox says, "Oh no, you got me all wrong. That was in the olden days. But now Mashiach is here, and we no longer eat birds. We get along. The wolf lies with the lamb, and the fox gets along with the birds. And you don't have to worry." And the fox is pretty convincing, and the bird is about to come down, and then all of a sudden they hear barking of dogs, and the fox stops running to escape the dogs. So the bird says, "What are you afraid of? I thought Mashiach is here." He says, "Yeah, tell that to the dogs. They don't believe in Mashiach." So that was the Dubna Magid's response. But that was the first assault to deny the belief in Mashiach. In the blessing to Yehuda, there is no letter Zayin. All the letters of the alphabet can be found in the blessing to Yehuda. Every single letter. Except, what? No, that's in Moses' blessing. But in Yaakov's blessing, it says, Yehuda ati yeduch achecha. No Zayin. Why not a Zayin? What's wrong with a Zayin? The word Zayin, the letter Zayin, letters in Hebrew have shapes. It's the shape of a sword. Zayin in Hebrew means weapon. Mashiach, who is a descendant of Yehuda, will not need weapons. As it goes back to what I was saying before. Mashiach will rule not with weapons, he'll rule with his influence. That he will reveal the good in everyone. So he doesn't need weapons. He doesn't need the Zayin. Interesting medrash. When Jacob was about to bless his children, and all of a sudden he was going to tell them when Mashiach is coming, and then it eludes him. The divine presence left him. So what did Jacob suspect? That maybe his sons were not so kosher. Maybe they were harboring idolatrous teachings and beliefs. So according to one medrash, they said, "Shema, listen, Yisrael, our father Israel." That was his name, Israel. Jacob had two names. Hashem Elokeinu, God is our God. Hashem Echad, the God that you have is also our God, and he's one God. We believe in one God. And Jacob breathed a sigh of relief. He says, "Ay, Baruch Shem Kavod Malchus Olam Va'ad." Blessed is the name of his glorious kingdom forever and ever. That was his response to their declaration that they too believe in one God. There's a famous parable when two landowners in Europe, they were like kings, and each one had a Jew that they used to call Mashke, that was in charge of running the estates, because Jews know how to take care of business, so each one had their own favorite Jew. And once these two landowners, they're called Peritzim, poritz in the singular, were meeting at some type of a hunt, and they were getting bored. They had anything they could have done, they already did. So one of them says, what can we do to have some fun? So one says, you know what? When we meet the next time, each of us should bring a wild animal, and we'll have a contest between these two wild animals. Oh, they love the idea. One of them goes back home, and he doesn't have any wild animals in his domain. So he calls in his mushka, says, Mushka, I have a job for you. I want you to get dressed up like a lion. Well, Mushka has no choice. So he comes to the arena, and there's a tiger on the other side. The gates open, and the lion, of course, very slowly starts moving, and the tiger is getting closer, and the lion realizes this is the end. So what does a Jew say at the end of his life? Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. And the tiger responds, Baruch Shem Kavod Malchus Le'olam V'Ched. That's the parable that Jews may be dressed differently. One is like a lion, one is a tiger, but one says Shema, the other one says Baruch Shem. We're all essentially the same. We have the same innate faith. That's one medrash. That's one of the reasons we don't say Baruch Shem out loud, because the Talmud says Moses never said it. In the Torah, it doesn't have that. In the Shema, it says go straight from Shema to V'yahavta. How could we change what the Torah says? But on the other hand, Jacob did say it, and out of deference to Jacob, we should say it. So we say it quietly. That's one of the reasons given.
But there's one time where you say it out
On
loud.
Yom Kippur.
Yom Kippur, no?
Because there's another reason why we say Baruch Shem, because when Moses was on the mountain, he heard the angels saying it. So he appropriated it from the angels. But we don't want the angels to get upset at us that we stole their praise, so we say it quietly. By Yom Kippur, we're like angels, so they don't mind. But then there's another medrash. When Jacob saw that the divine presence departed from him, he said to his children, you know what, maybe something is wrong with you. Why is this happening? Why am I losing my spiritual energy? And they said, no, we're blameless. If you look in all of the names of the 12 tribes, there are two letters that are missing, ches and a tes. That spells the word chet, sin. Those two letters are missing. We don't have any sins. We're sinless. And Jacob says, yeah, but you also don't have the letters kuf and tzadik, ketz, which means the ultimate deadline, the messianic age. So the question is, you mean because they were sinless, that's why they don't deserve to know when the deadline is going to be, when Mashiach will come? What's the connection between not having sins and not having the right to experience the ultimate redemption? So I think the answer is Mashiach, it says, will come when we do tshuva, when we return to God. Tzaddikim will not bring Mashiach. Righteous people who are always righteous, they will not bring Mashiach. Only someone who does tshuva, someone who was not righteous and becomes righteous. So Jacob is trying to tell them, oh, you're all tzaddikim, you have no sins? That's not enough to bring about the ketz, to bring the deadline. I want someone who has the power of tshuva, of changing. The power to change, the Talmud says, the place where people who return to Torah, Bali tshuva, masters of repentance, of return, the place where they stand, even the most perfect tzaddik cannot stand. And it says also that if one tzaddik would do tshuva, that would bring the redemption. What's wrong with the tzaddik being a tzaddik? Because that's not enough. Mashiach is waiting for us to change. And even if it's one little change, that can bring the redemption. It says, and the Rebbe would always quote the Rambam, who says, and he bases it on the Talmud, that if you make one little change in your life, it's like tipping the scales. And you tip the scales of your own life, you can tip the scales of the whole world, and you can bring redemption. One final thing. It says when Jacob passed away, although it says that he didn't really die, but imagine that he died and he was brought to the city of Hebron. All the leaders came around to see this massive funeral, and they said, Avel kaved leMitzrayim. This is a very profound time of mourning for Egypt. Why was it a profound time of mourning for Egypt? It was mourning for Jacob's children. Egyptians came along, but why did they focus on Egypt as a they may not have attended this, what I'm going to say now, but this is how it's interpreted by one of the commentators. I forgot which one it is. It says something very interesting. It says, every nation that had Jews living in it prospered. As soon as they drove the Jews out, they went downhill. Spain, for example, was one of the most powerful empires in the world. The Spanish Empire was the greatest empire. As soon as they drove the Jews out in 1492, Spain went downhill. Same thing with many other countries in the world. As soon as they got rid of the Jews, they went downhill. The leader of Russia, who's not very popular these days, Putin, once said, why is he so friendly to the Jews? It's not because I like Jews, because I like Russia. He feels that that's the success of Russia to have Jews there, and he's right. He's right. So that's when they saw Jacob. When Jacob left, that to them was an omen that the Jews are not staying in Egypt. They're beginning to leave. Egypt is in bad shape. Egypt is going to go downhill. Egypt was the most powerful empire then. It's not going to last. And indeed, it didn't last. There's no trace left of the original Egyptian empire. They only left dead monuments, nothing alive.
And today, look at Europe. Look what's happening in Europe.
France doesn't want
Right.
As they get rid of all the Jews, as the Jews leave.
Well, their policies are bringing their own demise. This conference in Paris is not going to hurt Israel in the long run. It's going to hurt France and all the 72 countries. You remember when the Rebbe made a UN? How many was it? 70 or 72? I think it was 72. Because now they say there are 70 nations gathering there, or 72 now, and that's the original 70 nations of the world that are ganging up against the lone sheep. And
This is in France now,
Yeah.
you're talking
yes,
about?
there's going to be a conference there on Sunday.
Yeah, on the 15th.
On what?
This
All the
Sunday?
countries of the world getting together to pressure Israel,
Pressure Israel about the two-state solution.
To pressure Israel to the two-state solution.
to impose a settlement on Israel, which means
But France does recognize that they cannot do it.
they're backtracking. They're backtracking because they're afraid. They are afraid. They are afraid of the new president. He could